So when you think of Iran, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us in the West, it's this image of a revolutionary, almost archaic theocracy, kind of stuck in 1979. But what if that whole picture is dangerously out of date? Today, we're going to tear down that old perception and look at Iran through a totally different lens. As a modern nation-state, one that's driven by a very calculated, very deeply rooted grand strategy.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. The big question is this. Is Iran's foreign policy just, the product of some irrational religious mission? Or is it actually a series of really calculated moves by a country with serious superpower ambitions acting on security needs that have been shaped by centuries of history? That's the puzzle we're going to try to piece together.
And the key to unlocking that puzzle, where we really have to start, is with this very modern idea, the axis of resistance. This alliance is without a doubt the clearest, boldest expression of Iran's strategy in action. And if you can understand this, you're well on your way to understanding Tehran's real goals on the world stage.
All right, Section 1. Let's start with the most basic question. Are the things Iran is doing part of some coherent, calculated strategy, or is it all just chaotic and reactive?
First things first, let's get on the same page with our terms. The axis of resistance. Think of it less like a formal treaty like NATO. It's more of a network, right? A web of militias stretching all across the Middle East, trained, funded, and supported by Iran. And they all share one main goal: to push back against American and Israeli influence. It's this flexible, coordinated system designed to let Iran project its power way, way beyond its own borders. Now check this out, because this quote really gets you inside the leadership's head. When those huge protests swept across Iran in 2022, we in the West saw it as a sign the regime was failing. But Supreme Leader Khamenei, he saw the exact opposite. He actually argued the protests were a foreign plot, and that they were happening because Iran's grand strategy was succeeding so well. So from his chair, all that unrest wasn't a symptom of failure. It was proof that Iran's enemies were getting desperate.
But to really get that perspective, we have to rewind. Iran's modern strategy wasn't just invented yesterday. It's woven from the threads of a really long and often pretty painful history. At the very core of Iran's identity is this deep feeling of what some people call strategic loneliness. It's this sense of being the only Persian Shia nation in a sea of Arab and Turkic Sunni powers. And that feeling of being unique has created these huge ambitions, but also these deep, deep anxieties. All of it made worse by a long history of foreign meddling and national humiliation.
And this timeline, wow, it just lays those traumas out there. Look at this. From losing huge chunks of territory to Russia back in 1828, to literally being carved up into zones of influence by Britain and Russia in 1907. Then you have the Allied invasion in 41 and the CIA-backed coup in 53. For Iranians, these aren't just dates in a history book. They are living, breathing memories that have created this national obsession with sovereignty.
So all this historical pressure, it created this massive debate inside Iran that honestly is still echoing today. On one side, you had the Shah. He was convinced the biggest threat was the Soviet Union, and the only way to survive was to be a close ally of the West. But on the other side, you had Prime Minister Mossadegh. He saw Western imperialism as the real danger, and he argued that real security meant fighting off foreign control over Iran's own resources, like its oil. This clash of ideas basically set the stage for everything that came next.
And that brings us to the huge turning point, the 1979 revolution. Because it basically rejected both of those paths and decided to forge a third way entirely.
So get this. In the lead-up to the revolution, the opposition leaders all pretty much agreed on two main principles for the new government. It had to be democratic and it had to be Islamic. But in a meeting in Paris, Ayatollah Khomeini himself literally took a pen and added a third equal pillar, istiqlal, or independence. This wasn't some minor addition. It was a core, foundational statement about what this revolution was all about.
And you have to understand, istiqlal means so much more than just political independence. It is a call for the total, complete severing of all foreign influence from Iran. We're not just talking military, but political, economic, even cultural influence. It's this idea of achieving absolute national autonomy with no strings attached to anyone, anywhere.
And nothing says it better than this quote from Khomeini himself. Somebody asked him what was the greatest single benefit of the revolution, and his answer was so simple and direct. Now all decisions are made in Tehran. For the revolutionaries, that was the ultimate prize.
And that context helps us reframe something like the 1979 U.S. hostage crisis. It wasn't just random revolutionary anger.
Internally, it was seen as a second revolution, a totally calculated, strategic move to get rid of rivals, fire up the public, and decisively, permanently cut ties with the United States. It was about cementing that principle of istiqlal once and for all.
So they built this foundation on the idea of total independence. What kind of grand strategy gets built on top of something like that? Let's unpack the core ideas.
First, it's really important to know that Iran's grand strategy isn't like some master plan written down in a secret binder somewhere. It's more like a strategic culture, a set of shared beliefs and consistent decisions that have, over decades, come together to form a clear plan of action. And it's all based on a very particular view of Iran's national interest.
And that strategy really boils down to 4 main pillars. First, you have resistance. It's the central idea for everything they do. Second is forward defense, the idea of fighting your enemies in places like Syria or Iraq so you keep the war far away from your own home. Third is Vision 2025, this ambition to become the #1 political, economic, and tech power in the region. And finally, self-reliance, this commitment to building what they call a resistance economy that can survive and maybe even do well no matter how many sanctions get thrown at them.
This anecdote is just incredible. It perfectly captures the mindset. So, Henry Kissinger once asked an Iranian official, when is Iran finally going to get tired of all this conflict and just give up its revolutionary cause? And the official just flipped the question right back at him. He said, when would the United States exhaust itself? See, that's the whole logic. It's not about defeating the US in a big war. It's about outlasting them, applying constant pressure until America just gets tired of the fight and goes home. And here's the thing. From Tehran's point of view, this strategy is working. Ayatollah Khamenei uses this metaphor, saying Iran has climbed the foothills and is now getting close to the mountain peak. And that's not just talk for the public. It reflects a genuine belief that despite all the outside pressure, Iran is actually winning the long game.
So, after all that, where does this leave us? What are the big takeaways from looking at Iran not as this irrational actor, but as a deeply strategic one? The main takeaway is really this. When we shift our perspective away from that old caricature of an irrational theocracy and instead see Iran as a nation-state that's pursuing a very logical, security-driven strategy, it gives us a much clearer and honestly a more predictive lens. It lets us see the logic behind their actions, even if we don't agree with that logic at all.
In the end, understanding this grand strategy isn't about agreeing with it. It's not about justifying it. The real question is something different. We've seen the consequences of Iran pursuing its strategy. But what's the potential cost for the region, for the US, for the world, of continuing to misunderstand it?